Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today I'm joined by American dissident and Army veteran Jake Lloyd. Attention! Salute Jake Lloyd for his service.
Thank you for highly respecting my military service, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
We're in the presence of heroes right now, so I just wanted to let all our listeners know about that. But there's a good reason we have Jake Lloyd on today, because we are talking all about the military. There's been a lot of controversies in the past week with Trump and the soldiers he claims to love so much. You know, the first thing that everyone keeps talking about is there's an Atlantic article that claims Trump called fallen World War I soldiers suckers and losers. He allegedly refused to visit a war cemetery in France in 2018 for this very reason. The story, much touted by the media, has been disputed by Trump, John Bolton, John Kelly's former chief of staff, and many others in the know. Jake, do you think Trump actually said this about the fallen?
You know, I kind of don't. I see a lot of stuff on Twitter where people are saying, like, you know, he wouldn't say this, or, you know, he probably did say this and it's either bad or it's, you know, funny, or we don't care, whatever. I just can't really envision Trump saying anything like that. I can't picture it. I can't hear him saying it, especially with, you know, as much as people say, and as much as, you know, possibly he does just say certain things because it's probably popular and stuff. I just really can't see that. I do think that he does, like, kind of buy into the traditional American stuff, like, you know, supporting the troops, especially World War I soldiers. It's not like, you know, it's not like something else. Like World War I, especially for people in Trump's generation, is kind of universally, you know, defended as like a war against good and evil, even though it was just, you know, a power struggle.
Yeah, and one of the things that they're complaining about Trump is that he said that, like, how did we know that they were the good guys? Like, why were we fighting the Germans? That they're like upset, like, how dare Trump not acknowledge that we were morally pure in World War I and the Germans were absolutely evil in World War I. And pretty much everyone agrees that, like, all sides were, like, stupid and that there was, like, no good or bad side. It was just, as you said, a power struggle between, you know, the great states of Europe. And it's also like, it's like, for a lot of people, people would wonder, like, why were we fighting the Germans in World War I? I mean, most people aren't educated on this fact. And, you know, Trump is just asking a question, but like this question that like millions of Americans would share and wondering, like, why were we fighting the Germans? Like, what brought us here? Were we really the good guys? Even though I don't even necessarily believe that Trump said this stuff, you know, it's not like the worst thing in the world. And I agree with you. I don't think that he said this. It sounds like somebody concocted a story and put words into Trump's mouth that sounded like something he would say. Because a lot of this stuff sounds like they're like, it's somebody who is not actually Trump. And like, Trump always likes calling people suckers and losers. And he would definitely disparage our World War I dead about this. And this is all about a long, you know, buried controversy from 2018, where he was supposed to visit, you know, a military cemetery at Bella Woods in France, and he didn't, and other world leaders were there, and there was a controversy over why he didn't do it, and the media made fun of him, saying that he didn't want to get rain on his hair, even though what it turned out to be is that the weather conditions did not prevent his helicopter to fly there, and that if they wanted to do a motorcade there, it would take like 2 hours. You know, all perfectly understandable reasons. And, you know, they're just returning to this to, you know, attack Trump in the middle of election. You know, this is like their attempt at an Access Hollywood tape. They do realize that Biden does not have this in the bag. So they're trying to find anything they can with like an Access Hollywood, you know, style effect. I mean, today, you know, it just broke that, you know, Bob Woodward's book. He's saying that Trump intentionally, you know, reduce the effect, you know, tone down about the coronavirus. He was trying to say, oh, it's not a big deal, even though he knew that it was a bad thing. And they're now saying like, oh my God, he led to hundreds of thousands of Americans dead because he didn't say, this is really bad, you should all panic. And right. They're going to keep trying to find these quotes. But with, you know, returning back to the more military aspect of it, is they are trying to drive a wedge. You know, this is the military itself. Like these all the people who were relaying the story to the journalist who wrote this, Jeffrey Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, it was all Department of Defense officials, and it even seems like people who were associated with James Mattis are the ones who are leaking. And it's unclear if John Kelly is also involved in this story. And, you know, in the Bob Woodward book, they're talking massive amounts of shit about Trump in that. So it does seem that there is a clear divide between Trump and the top military brass, and it's being represented in the story. And Jeffrey Goldberg promises that there are more devastating anecdotes he has about Trump's disrespect for the military. So what do you make of that? Why do you think the top brass is, you know, having this antagonistic attitude towards Trump?
Yeah, that's a really important question to address. And just to chime in on the last thing really quick, even from a purely, like, if you think of Trump in a completely cynical manner, it doesn't even make sense for him to say, "Oh, I don't want to go visit that cemetery. Those guys are losers." Because Trump loves the photo op of him around troops and around funerals and the military stuff. He loves it. So, and it works for him. So anyway.
Yeah, John Bolton said this didn't happen, and John Bolton has like every reason to say that this happened, because John Bolton's whole book was about how Trump hates the military, and he was aware of this whole situation. And if he had heard about this would have. He even said himself, "If I had heard about this, there would have been an entire chapter in my book about it."
Exactly.
And yet he's saying that this didn't happen.
Exactly. So to address the question you asked about why there would be this friction, why there would be this rub between Trump and the top brass in the military, the people at the Pentagon, the people at high levels of command on military posts and at every level of the military organization structure, it really doesn't even. You don't even have to go that high to see that. Now, at the top levels, of course, you have these people who are college educated. Obviously, to be commissioned as an officer anyway, you have to be college educated. Second of all, generally at this level, these people have master's degrees. Some of them even, rarely. It's much more rare to have PhDs, but you do have doctors and stuff like medical doctors and stuff at these higher levels. So you have very educated, often overeducated people, because a lot of times they don't go to school because they're trying to learn anything necessary. It just gives them an edge in the promotion process. So a lot of times these people are very overeducated. And then plus you have, similar to how in politics in Washington, you have people in political office or in positions in an administration or in a cabinet where they are just kind of trying to, they're doing their job now, but when they get out, they're going to be a lobbyist or they're going to work for this company or that company. The same thing happens with the military. And I think that everybody kind of knows this, that you see it fairly frequently where somebody is in a high position in the military and they do X and Y and Z. And then when they get out, they go work for Halliburton or, one of these other
Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Exactly. Boeing, Lockheed Martin. I knew a guy that when you get out of the military, you go, now this happens now. I don't know how it was several years ago, but you go through like an out processing class and they teach you about all your benefits, about how to use your GI Bill so you can go to school if you want to, vocational school, how to use, assistance programs if you need it, how to get enrolled with the VA, all of this different stuff. And it is a little bit divided depending, but generally it's kind of all mixed together. You're with people of all different, ranks and jobs and stuff. And I remember hearing because you take a break, it's like a classroom setting. You take a break, you go to the lunchroom or whatever. And I heard some guys talking that were from another class that were sitting at a lunch table across from me. And these guys are talking about the Boeing jobs that they have lined up. Or maybe it was Lockheed Martin, I don't remember, but they were actually coming back to Texas because there's one here in the DFW area. So even just that, you hear it. The military industrial complex is an overused phrase at this point in a lot of circles, but it's true. It's very real, obviously. And these guys like the war and stuff for that reason. In addition to that, they just like it because it makes them look good. Officers love to do things, whether it's training or whatever. It's, enlisted guys, not to get up on the enlisted high horse and be like, oh, I work for a living, I'm not an officer or whatever. But like these guys actually have to go do things. Like enlisted guys have to, come under gunfire and like carry people out of, buildings where there's insurgents and stuff to get, a silver star or whatever. Whereas a lot of times officers just get it for being in command of the force that did that stuff, whereas the guys who actually did it don't. So it looks good for them to be at war. They get the opportunity for a lot of glory and a lot of, reward and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's all true. And you hit the point on the military-industrial complex, and that actually brings up the other controversy with Trump, is that in his own statements, he called out the generals and the top brass for wanting wars because it made them money. And media couldn't believe that he would say this. And I'm going to say his full quote entirely is, this is what Trump said: "I'm not saying the military's in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people on the Pentagon probably aren't, because they want to do nothing but fight wars. So all those wonderful companies that make the bombs," oh shoot, cut out, hold on, "that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy." And he also shared a clip from Glenn Greenwald of Dwight D. Eisenhower criticizing the military-industrial complex in his farewell address. And all these people are just like, these journalists are going out of the way, like, how dare he attack our military-industrial complex? We must defend Boeing and Lockheed Martin. This is outrageous that he would imply that generals want more war because it might make these defense contractors more money. How dare anyone say this, even though all this stuff is, was typical, liberal like talking points during the Bush era. They love saying this stuff in the Bush era about how, oh, we just went to Iraq for the money to help out Halliburton's bottom line and everything like that. And now that Trump, suggests that, there's of course economic incentives into, doing more military occupations in the Middle East, doing these military interventions, wanting to build these cool bombers or whatever that we never use, and tanks. Even to suggest that there's no economic incentive here for any of this. So he's making the left defend the military-industrial complex,
which is so funny, because even if they weren't the ones saying this, 10 years ago or so, or more than that, probably, I guess, since we had Obama, but during the Bush years, even if they weren't the ones saying this back then, Dwight Eisenhower is one of the guys that I've heard them hold up a lot as bygone era of Republican civility and Republican, temperament, where he was a great guy and he just whatever. Now, Trump's not saying anything that Eisenhower didn't say about the military-industrial complex. But when Trump says it, it's like he hates the military. He's putting us in danger. He hates America, etc.
Yeah, and Trump has actually spent much more on the military. The military should be happy with Trump by his policies, that, he's increased defense spending. He's investing in a lot of these new projects they have. And yet they, refuse to show any respect for him because they're so invested in these foreign adventures. The military opposes his withdrawals from Afghanistan. They want to keep troops in Iraq. They were irate that Trump would dare take out troops from Syria and not help out the Kurds, even though us helping out the Kurds would have probably led us into a war with Turkey and all these other state actors in the Middle East. We had to keep troops there. And the military is, of course, trying to get us into a war with Iran. And Trump is actually a little bit more aggressive on Iran. But they're very opposed to this. They want to keep us in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria until the end of time. And Trump, disagrees with that. And every time he tries to get us out of Afghanistan, the military comes up with something that he has to stay. When he wanted to get us out in Afghanistan in 2017, McMaster came up to him with these photos and showed him these girls in skirts from the 1970s. And it's like, this is how Afghanistan was before the Taliban. We've got to defend the women's rights. And they told him if we leave, China's going to steal all the minerals. We have to stay there to defend the minerals. So they, bamboozled him into staying, but he still wants to go. And now when he's trying to pull troops out, they came up with this stupid story about the Russians are paying bounties for our guys in Afghanistan. And, you have to remember that, we were doing this in the 80s against the Soviets as well. We were funding and operating with, the Mujahideen against the Soviet occupying forces. And yeah, we were definitely wanting to get bounties off of Soviet soldiers. We were wanting to kill them, and much more than the Russians. And this is such a sketchy story where it's like, yeah, we'll pay you for an American dead. And it's like, well, why are the Russians trying to do this? And like, there's something very suspicious about this. And the timing is to keep us in Afghanistan. And by saying that, we can't just stay there because of the Taliban and everything, and everyone knows we've been there for 18 years with nothing to show for it. So they have to say, we have to resist Russian aggression in Afghanistan. Russians are trying to kill our soldiers. Thus, we have to stay there forever. So I think a lot of it is that they want more wars. For some of it, maybe monetary reasons, but they are also ideologically committed to this idea we have to challenge, Russia. We have to challenge Iran. We have these enemies, and we have to use the military because otherwise the military is not, involved in these adventures. They feel useless. They feel like there's no purpose for the military. But if there's like a war going on or an occupation, or etc., they feel like there's a purpose and they can get more money in their budget, and they're spreading the American cause worldwide.
Right. And you think about it, and a lot of these guys probably were kids during the tail end of the Cold War and stuff. And so now that they're, up at the top of this, and, they probably still have this kind of subconscious fantasy about, we got to stick it to the Russians, even if they know it's not real. And you mentioned like that we, did similar stuff to the Russians. Whether or not they actually did this, who knows? But it goes back
even bounties. We were telling like Osama bin Laden, like, here's a bunch of weapons and training.
Yeah,
go kill Russians.
But it goes back to what Trump said that one time. He's like, "What do you think? We're so innocent? You think America's never done anything bad like this?"
And they get outraged about that. They're like, how dare Trump suggest that America's never done anything bad? Like, we have never meddled in any election before. And so there's this, and then the left, and it's all these liberals who are saying the exact same stuff that Trump is saying now, who are now on the flip side. They're like, we must support the troops under any circumstance. Like, they're like playing patriotic music all the time. They're like, saluting the troops is like some like terrible, like awful, dysgenic, like, Deadspin reporter who doesn't know anybody in the military and has like could not be in the military at any purpose, is now like throwing up his hand and saluting our servicemen because they're standing up against Trump. I think the funniest one is like Chris Hayes, MSNBC host. He got his start during the Iraq War years. He was a huge Iraq War critic, and he was saying many of the same things that Trump is saying now. And he was totally outraged that Trump would share the Glenn Greenwald tweet of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he was doing it in like the most bitchy, passive aggressive manner, like demanding Twitter like censor it. He's like, yeah, really cool that Twitter allows this discourse to happen. Really great, Twitter. Thank you, Twitter, for doing this. It's like, you're such a little pissant. Like, what do you think, like, he's saying? And, like, it's not like you care about the troops. You just, like, are really upset about Trump. You're just really upset about Trump. That's the fact of the matter. And, they're now supporting even these war efforts and like wanting to keep eternal occupation. And just because the Russian bounty, now all these people who would have said like we needed to pull out the troops, in 2012, even during the Obama years, like, why are we keep our troops there? Now I want the troops there forever, because you cannot be on the opposing or be on the Russian side. If you want troops out of there, you're helping Russia. And anytime they want to pull troops out or do something with the defense budget, Trump administration I'm speaking of, this apparently is helping Russia. It's like when we're taking troops out of Germany, I don't know what, threat, and we're moving them to Poland. It's like, yeah, there's still troops in between, American troops in between Russia and Germany. And they're like, this is what Putin wants. It's like, we have to keep our troops there. It's like, and they're also complaining about Trump attacking NATO. It's like, what the hell is the purpose of NATO now? Like, the Warsaw Pact is gone. The Soviet Union is gone. Russia is.
It's also funny because Germany like gets all of its oil, its gas from Russia and stuff. And so it's like, are these people really enemies?
Yeah, with all these European countries, Poland and the Baltic countries still like fear Russia, but Russia does not have the kind of power it did as the Soviet Union, and it's not as big of a threat. to the world order, that we need to keep up with NATO. And also all these countries like don't spend anything on defense because they just expect America to provide their defense. And that was a good part of like Trump saying, they're not paying their fair share. They're not paying their fair share. Germans like want like their troops are, I mean, they might not care that the troops are there because they don't feel threatened by anybody. I don't think the average German feels threatened by Russia at all. As you were saying that, much of their oil supply comes from Russia, and there's a lot of economic connections between the two countries. They do not fear a Russian invasion of Germany. I don't know why Russia would be invading Germany at this point, and they have to go through several countries to do that. But I don't know. You got to ask these libs about how, they're military geniuses. So
true.
So we're providing all the defense for this, in NATO, we're spending, billions and billions of dollars on these like, strategic alliances that no longer make sense. And, one NATO partner with Turkey is going around causing chaos in Syria. It's trying to colonize Libya right now. And it's even threatening Greece, which is another NATO partner. And somehow that's like all okay. But Trump just saying like, you got to pay your fair share, or we really want to reassess the purpose of NATO, is a dire threat to the whole world order, just to say those points. But Turkey can just do whatever the hell they want, or even start a war with Russia in Syria. This is just all things we need to accept. So there is, the military is just operating on a Cold War basis. I don't think for much of the military in the deep state, they really haven't, figured out their purpose in a world without the Soviet Union. We've been trying to figure that out for 30 years, and they still haven't really figured it out. And they want like a global enemy for us. And some of the military and some of the intelligence community does see China as that new threat. But the difference between China and the Soviet Union is that our economy is heavily, entwined with China.
Right.
The Soviet Union didn't have a strong influence over Hollywood. The Soviet Union didn't have Lenin institutes at all of our colleges. We were not having tens of thousands of Soviet students come over to our country to influence it. And, Soviet Union did not have our tech industry come before it and bow down and saying, we'll do whatever you want. We'll do whatever you ask. China has much more influence over our country. Our economy is much more dependent on it. We really cannot have a Cold War with them. So much for the intelligence community and the military, they just revert back to Russia because like our economy doesn't depend on it. They're white people, so we don't have to worry about being called racist. And, it brings back the Cold War, and they're in a much weaker state than they were in the Soviet Union. Like nobody actually, except for the craziest libtards, actually feels threatened by Russia. Like nobody does, unless you're in Ukraine or in the Baltic. Like, I don't think anyone in the world should feel threatened by Russia. But we imagine that like Russians are hiding under every mattress and Putin is controlling every lever of our government just because of Rachel Maddow has told them. And our military supports this, and much of our intelligence community does as well. They want to see Russia as the eternal enemy. And I mean, Russia does, not like America, but I think if we, worked on our relations, something could be had. And there's a lot of problems with Russia. I don't want to say that I'm 100% like, Putin is the greatest man on earth, and Russia is just such a great country. In a lot of ways, it's a very nice country, and there's many problems with it. But I don't viewing them as our main geopolitical adversaries. Just you'd have to take a time machine back to the 1980s to think that.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting it on the head there. Like I really think that America,
on the head, right there. Yeah, they call me the hammer.
Well, the military and the intelligence community would like to keep, because as you mentioned, they want to preserve the current world order. They don't really have that global enemy that they want to have, and Russia being in a weakened state, America can kind of just keep Russia, presently can kind of just keep Russia just so under its boot, just to where it's still there, but we can kind of control it. We can kind of have it be the scary bad guy on the other side of the world.
Yeah, it serves as a useful enemy. And a lot of stuff that Russia does on the global stage is much better. I mean, they always oppose our stupid actions throughout the world. Like Russia, or at least Putin himself, he was not the president at the time. Medvedev. Or I always have a problem. Medvedev was the president at the time. He was just prime minister. during the Libyan intervention. He's like, this is the dumbest thing in the world. Like, why are we doing this? Of course, Libya is now a failed state, hasn't had a stable government in 9 years. Great win for, Western democracy. They've also been opposing our Syria interventions, which the same thing that happened in Libya would have happened in Syria. Probably much worse because the Islamist activity there was, at an even greater level than in Libya. So they're very much they do not operate on our ridiculous notions about like spreading democracy to the world and like, oh no, there's like, we cannot believe that Damascus does not have gay pride parades. We have to invade. It's like, can you believe how they treat women in Afghanistan? We must go there and stay there. And no amount of American lives, we can throw thousands of American lives there as long as one girl can go and read 50 Shades of Grey in her high school class. Like, this is like the type of stuff they want. And like Russia never, like, they do not have these stupid moral reasons. I mean, they're just like it is much more like a 19th century, traditional nation state. Like, we want to be strong as Russians and we want to, show that we're still a mighty power and we want to get involved there. I know they don't necessarily have these moral, these stupid liberal moral reasons to go to these countries. I mean, which makes it they operate on a much saner level than us. Thus, we have this like liberal moral pursuit. Our mission to spread democracy around the world has made us sick and made us filled with stupid ideas, and that's very bad. And we, and our military unfortunately believes a lot of this. Like, part of the QAnon thing is imagining that there's a red deep state versus a blue deep state, and the red deep state is like the Pentagon and the real honest law enforcement versus like the CIA and the State Department. And the CIA and State Department are very bad, but in a lot of ways, the military believes in the same stuff that the CIA and State Department has. And a lot of conservatives don't realize that because they just see as like a tough, high T general who's like, respect my order, attention, and they're just like, they, conservatives obediently salute. And they're like, this general could never do anything bad. And then this general, of course, is promoting Black Lives Matter, talking about how the military needs to better integrate transgender individuals, and and also being deeply upset at how Moscow isn't allowing gay pride parades in Russia.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, where are because Americans do need to understand it, and I think that some people almost get it, but not quite. Because where are the generals coming from, or the prospective generals? They're coming from the same pool of people as the intelligence community and other people in administrative positions in the government that obviously lean liberal or are very liberal, because they're all coming from these same universities. They all have to go to school in order to become officers. The divide between these types of people that we're discussing and the normal people that Trump said love him does not just exist at the highest levels of government down to like the lowest. It happens even in like a platoon, just at the platoon level of what we're talking about. And we also have to understand that different branches of the army, there are different branches like the engineer corps, the infantry, artillery, etc. Within those, there are different opinions too. If you're in the infantry, you're more likely to get troops that love Trump, that love him, and would basically do anything that he says. And then if you go to like some kind of like logistics oriented branch, you're going to have or intelligence, military intelligence, you're going to have people who are more likely to lean left. But even
those MOSs are more filled with minorities and women versus combat arms, which combat arms is still largely white and male.
Exactly, yeah, because only recently have women been able to join combat arms. And then plus, for whatever reason this is, you can speculate all that you want. Whenever, if you look at the demographic makeup of combat arms, especially the infantry, it's mostly white men. It just so happens that white men are the only ones who really, are interested in dying for America. That's just a reality. There were obviously some, minorities in my part of the military when I was in there. But like if you look at like cooks, for example, cooks are like almost all black. And I don't know why that is, rather than like joining some other position. Again, you can speculate. There are things that you can look at actually, but I'm not going to go into it because reasons. But and if but
they're just really good cooks, man.
Yeah, they're just good cooks.
They want some good home, authentic Southern cooking, so they provide that in the military.
But in the platoon structure, if you talk to like the they call it in the Army that you call them the Joes, like GI Joes, the guys that are just doing the work. They're the ones carrying the stuff. They're the ones shooting the guns, all of that stuff. Those guys generally love Trump. Now, if they're non-white, a lot less likely, but they like Trump either for one of two reasons. And both of these groups exist at the same time. People who think Trump loves the military, he's going to give us a good war to fight. And then people who say that, Trump likes the military and therefore he's not going to make us go do something that's like worthless. Now, both of these, the funny thing about this is in the military, both of these groups like Trump because they like him. It's not about what he's going to do for them. They see in the military what they want to see, and they just like Trump. So they think that he cares about me in the military. So he's going to do what I think the right thing is. And so they like Trump whether he does that or not. The people, if you look at like the platoon leader, which is, generally a first or second lieutenant, that guy, I had multiple platoon leaders, and neither of them liked Trump. It also just so happened that both of them were West Point grads. So you can do with that information what you will. That West Point grads, the U.S. Military Academy, is pumping out these officers who don't even like a president like Trump. And you can, is it politics? Is it because of, the core beliefs or the core, the differences between him and the other, whatever it is, that's notable. That's not good that our military academy, the foremost military academy in the world, is pumping out soldiers, officers who have these beliefs like, we need to defend against Russia. We have to, support gay marriage across the world, all of this different stuff. And these guys are the ones that are going to be generals. So there's a divide immediately on the threshold between enlisted and officer. You don't have to go to the Pentagon to see it.
Yeah, and that seems to be the case with with West Point itself. And West Point, the top West Point graduates sent a letter, I think it was last month or in June, demanding a more thorough anti-racist education. And it was like demanding, Black history courses and this stuff. And it was also demanding like a separate disciplinary system for non-white students where they would be treated much nicer than the white students, and they'd be able to get away with having bad grades. And these were the top West Point graduates. So these is like the best of the best that the Army is apparently producing. And they're fully into the most radical Black Lives Matter rhetoric. And they basically want kids to read students at West Point to fully inculcate Black Lives Matter ideals in their education. And it was just revealed today with Christopher Rufo, who's been doing a lot of invaluable work exposing critical race theory education within government jobs. He just determined that in some leadership courses at West Point, they're requiring the students to read critical race theory, an introduction, and a critical introduction to queer theory, because queer theory is absolutely important to winning war. And this is on a leadership course. So why do you think the military has gone so PC in recent years?
I think it's hard to tell about, like which one came first as far as, like why the military has been so susceptible to it. I think that it is because of the officer corps' reliance upon, higher education, or, the so-called higher education, right? Because if you look at historically, the Army, the officer corps of the Army and the Navy here in the U.S. has been like, it was a very prestigious thing to be a part of, and it was a great way to, a way that you could walk up the ladder of social class in America. And part of that happened to be receiving an education. Now, of course, back then, college education was very different. It was, you had classical college or classical university education had a much different purpose than what it has now, not even to mention the, indoctrination aspects. And so back then it was so reliant upon making sure that its officers were well educated, and that, and the purposes for which people joined were very different. And now that we have no social fabric, we have no real society. Even it's just become another bureaucratized ladder, like everything else in the government. And so now you have this same reliance upon the education system, the colleges and the universities, when they're actually, as we all know, and it's not to belabor the point, but anti-America, anti-white, anti-soldier, as far as the soldiers on the ground. And so these same universities that are programming politicians and normal university students are now programming the leaders at the.
So people think that like the military was all based and red pilled in the 50s and 60s. In a lot of ways, that they were liberals at the time. It was led by liberals. I mean, Maxwell Taylor, who's one of the main guys who engineered the Vietnam War, was considered a liberal at his time. William Westmoreland had liberal ideas, who's another one of the generals who was leading with the Vietnam War. They're very much committed to this idea of America as like the great spreader of democracy, and we've got to spread liberal values to the world. And even though Eisenhower himself was not a liberal, he had, he's very queasy about desegregation and how it was being enforced by the courts. Omar Bradley took issue with how the government was demanding the military integrate immediately in the late 1940s. There was some opposition, and there were generals who, came out of it and were definitely not politically correct, such as somebody like Curtis LeMay, who ran as George Wallace's running mate in 1968. So they were producing types like this, and there's still been military generals who were, definitely not liberals. And by liberals, I'm meaning it is like more than a broader term.
Yeah. And I think that's actually true what you're saying. A lot of generals like that were forced out. Like Douglas MacArthur was forced out. He was kicked out basically because of his ideas on how to handle Korea. He's like, why are we handling, like, do we want this to go on forever, or do we want to finish it right now? Because if we want to finish it, I can do it. And then they were like, going to fire him. And he's like, okay, I'll just resign. So that happened to a lot of generals at the time.
Yeah, and there was another general, I always forget his name, who even in the war, he was actually a leader in integrating the army. And then when he got out, I think it was Wes Walker. Yeah, something. It was General Edwin Walker. I think he got out, and then he became a leader in the right-wing movements. It was a firm opponent of integration and desegregation when he was out of the military. And, he was like a major general, I believe. So that was a very high-ranking person to be associated with the right wing in the 1960s. And, there were these generals who were able to see differently, but I don't see any general today, like someone coming out of the modern military, of somebody who is in the baby boomer or Generation X, who would come out of that and like be anybody like an Edwin Walker or a MacArthur, or even somebody with the views of Eisenhower, who was fundamentally have a conservative. I think some of them may be privately conservative, and they're maybe not have a big deal with gay marriage, but ultimately their main concern is America has to be an aggressive on the world stage because they're working at Boeing or Lockheed Martin, and they always think that more money spent on the military is good, and they don't really understand domestic issues, and they think that their domestic issues are secondary to the military's interest, which is always foreign adventures. So they're continuing on. And if you look at people who are like come out of the military and like maybe considered a career in politics, you have people like Wesley Clark, who is a huge liberal, David Petraeus, another liberal, even McChrystal, who conservatives turned him into a hero when he publicly criticized Obama, and I believe in 2010 or 2011. He's a liberal. So you're not going to have somebody come out who's like, a lot of people on the right wing imagine that we'll have some high-ranking military official who can come out and turn himself into Pinochet or Franco. And I'm like, no, even in the 40s, and like the only type of person we've seen, the personality who could even possibly do that in our, in the last 100 years is probably Douglas MacArthur. We have, even in our history, we haven't produced many generals like that. I would only say of people who are Napoleon or Franco type characters, the only two I can really think of are Jackson and MacArthur. Is most of these guys don't really understand domestic politics. They don't know how to motivate the ordinary people. I mean, they worked in a system where they give the order and that's it. They don't have to. They don't have to inspire people or really give up a great speech or anything like that. They have their point. Like, I'm the general. Here's your orders. Boom. Which is fine with the military context.
I agree, because you have like somebody like General Pershing in World War I, who comes back and he was, I mean, just like loved, adored, hailed as like the hero of that age, and he was a great general, like excellent general. But he comes back and, I mean, he even did cool stuff in the Philippines and stuff, cool stories, owning Muslims. But
that was before World War I, though.
But the thing was, in World War I, he did great and everything. He comes back, parades for him and everything, but he has no idea how to. He even considered a presidential run. They finally like got him in and everything, but he did it too late. He didn't know how to give speeches. He wasn't charismatic in the way that you need to be as a politician. So definitely in the 20th century, I mean, MacArthur was the only one that could have done that. Patton had
even
like
with Eisenhower, who was the last general to be elected president. He was very much like a mild-mannered bureaucrat, rather than like this inspiring like caudillo. He was not a caudillo. He was just somebody who was like, he's like, he knew how to manage and operate things. And even as president, he spent most of his time like golfing. He was not like this great like warlike or great warrior prince as president. I mean, he was just like, hey, I'm going golfing. I'm watching the football game.
Right. Yeah.
There's like a very amiable figure who didn't necessarily have this. He was the complete opposite of Napoleon or anyone of that caliber. So and that's like the type of people they would inspire. I mean, Wesley Clark had a certain connection with people, and he was like a pretty good public speaker, but he was like a huge liberal. And when he ran for president, like he didn't catch on at all. Maybe that was due to his political talents. And somebody like David Petraeus, who even before his adultery scandal probably wasn't going to be a serious presidential contender because he couldn't. Like he has like no charisma, and it's the same with Jim Mattis. Like Jim and all of their concerns focus on the military and securing the military's interests. But bringing us up to another point, pretty much everyone agrees that in November there's going to be a lot of chaos. It's going to have a contested election, especially people are not going to know who the president is for days, possibly even weeks. And there is now talk of maybe the military has to step in and, kick Trump out of office by any means necessary. Do you think this is like a serious possibility of the military rising up against the commander-in-chief in a contested election?
I don't know. It's like a tough. It's way more complex than a lot of people would think that it is, because you don't have a leader in that type of situation in the military. It's people will generally follow leaders, or and if they say that a commanding officer is directing their soldiers under them they're in charge of taking out the president, they're going to go in and arrest him or whatever. Well, say that the guys don't want to do it. Well, they don't have anybody else to go follow, so they're just going to leave. If anything, they're just going to leave and they'll be deserters or whatever, because they're saying, I'm not going to do this. And then eventually they will find somebody to go in there and do it. They don't, because you need a leader to organize the ones who wouldn't want to in order to have like a successful like breakaway military force. And I don't know, basically all of what we've been talking about today, I don't know if that would exist. So I'm not sure what it would look like if it were to happen. It's hard for me to imagine even the left, the globalists, whatever, ordering this to happen, because that would be such an upset to the world order. Like that would, imagine that an American president having to be removed by the military, even if they think that they need to do that, it would just be so upsetting to people's sensibilities, and it would be so shocking, and it would be hard to reassume the charade that they want us to all believe is still real about, we can return to civility, things will go back to normal, It's just, so it's hard for me to imagine them even trying to make that happen.
Yeah, as you were pointing out, they don't have the leadership to it. And we do. This is one good thing about America, is that we have bred a type of military leader who is not going to resist civilian orders to the extent that somebody like in South America where there's military coups, plenty that have been military coups aplenty in throughout history, and even in 19th century and 20th century Europe where the military had a very independent mindset of its own. Even though the military is very concerned with its own interests, it really doesn't know how to lead on an issue like that. And there is not a general like Milley or Milley or the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Mm-hmm.
He is not going to serve in this role. Like that guy wouldn't know what to do in this situation. They would have to take orders from somebody. The intelligence community seems much more eager to do this, but I don't think any of their public facing leaders would want to take in this responsibility. I don't know if they want to get involved. They want somebody to direct them. And what would happen? It was be someone like Nancy Pelosi investing in the power of the House of Representatives. Like the House would just like take a vote to like voting for a military coup. Like there could be some like ridiculous thing. And Nancy Pelosi says, like, as the power invested in me as this House Speaker, I ordered the military to kick Trump out of the White House. And maybe that could be their cue in this situation. Like, I mean, the military would definitely not be on Trump's side in a contested election chaos. Even when they were having these riots over George Floyd, the military resisted Trump's efforts to use them against the rioters. The defense secretary, Mark Esper, overrode Trump's orders to bring troops to D.C. He told a lot of these troops to just stay home. And clearly the military was issuing statements in support of Black Lives Matter. And they were telling all their troops, like, we're very sorry this is happening. Milley also, apologized to his troops by appearing with Trump as he was restoring order in D.C. So they do not have, in a contested election, like Trump cannot count on the military to restore order. That's another problem with that, is like a greater problem is not so much that they would kick Trump out of office, send in troops with, the rifles, and then like Trump is like marched out of the Oval Office and the military is like calling in Nancy Pelosi is like, all clear, democracy restored. Like it probably wouldn't happen with that. What's more likely is the military just refuses to help Trump restore order. Like there could be, hundreds of cities burning and the military is like, we don't want to get involved in this. We feel the pain of these voters. We feel the pain of Black Lives Matter. And we just don't want to get involved in the political matter as like all of America's on fire. That's much more likely scenarios that Trump knows he cannot count on the military to restore order. And he's going to have to resort to, the Border Patrol, ICE, the National Prison Guards. These were the people he was bringing in to defend him in D.C. He was not bringing in, federal troops. He's bringing in random like federal law enforcement. And even if you look and see who he sent out to Portland, he was sending like Border Patrol agents. So he'd have to like call in like Border Patrol agents off the wall.
Yeah, the DHS guys he might call them in too.
Yeah, just be like DHS and ICE. DEA, I don't know. Like he doesn't have many institutions. Like you can't call on the FBI, can't call on the CIA, can't call on the military. He can call on the Republican governors if they have National Guard. They would probably have to send them to other states to help out with the chaos. And I think it's almost guaranteed. I think it's like a 95% chance that we're going to have a serious event over the election. And we're going to have riots and unrest. Even if there is like a Biden blowout, which I don't even think is going to happen, I think we're still even going to have unrest. And Trump is still going to question the legitimacy of it because there's all these, problems with mail-in voting.
Right.
So I don't know. He cannot trust the military to restore order. I think that's the better, the more likely scenario rather than launching a coup. Our military does not have the capacity to launch a coup. And even if they ever did, going back to my point about right wingers, imagining a based and red pilled military coup, is if they did have a coup, it'd be over something stupid, such as this, or Democratic president like reducing their budget. Like I think if Bernie Sanders ever became president and actually tried to implement a lot of his ideas about the defense budget and our overseas presence, like the way the intelligence community tried to remove Trump, the military would do that to Bernie. I think they would both join forces and actually do a much more successful attempt at toppling. But it's not like necessarily like a coup that we've always imagined. It's something like we've created a bunch of falsehoods and we're spreading them to reporters and we're creating media hysteria and we're hoping that this is enough to get him impeached, as what happened with the CIA did and the Russia hoax and what the State Department did against Trump over the Ukraine phone call. So they're able to do this, but it's a very effeminate way of going about it, backhanded way. It's not sending in the troops and arresting. It's like, ooh, we recorded this phone call and, cut out all the context. Here you go, Washington Post. And that's where it goes from.
Yeah. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario in November where there's not, because even if you think about it, even when Trump won and there wasn't really, like, they did the electoral college stuff and maybe there was some Russian interference, like they said that a month or two later, but even after he just won and it wasn't really contested, there were all of these not quite riots, but street demonstrations, violence in the street, and that continued all the way through almost to fall of 2017.
Yeah, that's true. I bet it was nowhere near on the level that we're seeing.
No, it was nowhere near.
And we're definitely going to see, I thought there would be much more violent protesting when Trump won. And I was like surprised. But I guess it took, almost 4 years to kick in, and now it's happening right now. And it will absolutely occur. I mean, there are already organizations who are planning it. There was a Daily Beast article about all these powerful liberal groups preparing, a plan to do if Trump contests the election. And it's all these insane ideas, even, states like vowing to secede if, Trump does not do what they want. And I think we could very well see this. It's not just going to be necessarily violence in the street. There's also going to be serious challenges to American legitimacy and our national union in ways we probably haven't seen. I mean, this could be another situation we haven't seen since, the pre-Civil War era. Which, we have this.
I think it'll deal a serious blow, like we've been talking about, to the current world order they're trying to preserve. It'll, even if they don't do the military stuff, it'll seriously, I'm not saying like this, this will end America or anything like that, because people said that about the Civil War. But I think it'll put us in a very precarious situation that'll kind of necessitate serious unrest and put us on the brink of dissolution or restoring things to where they need to go. But I think this will do a great deal to push us towards that.
Yeah. So stay safe in November. That's the one bit of advice I have.
Yeah. Don't go to the protests. Stay home.
Do not go to the protests. As I have always said, do not go to the protests. You always have to watch out. And if you go there, the state will come down harder on you if you're a right winger versus if you're a left winger. That's just the way it goes. Yeah. It's a shitty order we have, but there's not much we can do about it at this moment. But moving on to the reader questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions by signing up for the patron option at Highly Respected's Patreon. This question comes from Tim. He asks, Scott, why does everyone like to say American GIs in World War II were the real Antifa? This is one of the most idiotic arguments I've ever seen. True, that is one of the most idiotic arguments you've ever seen. Well, as I've said a lot of times on the show, is that we see all of politics and all of world events through the prism of World War II. This is the only historical reference point. And I think that's a lot of a failure of education. A lot of it's with a failure of what movies choose to be broadcast. Like if you look at historical movies, they're pretty much all set in World War II era. I mean, they don't do many movies even about World War I, of course, even though you had 1917. They don't do very many movies about the Civil War. We had Gods and Generals and Gettysburg. I think Gods and Generals came out 15 years ago, and I don't think we'll see you also had Lincoln. Not many Civil War movies. And prior to World War II, Civil War was a central event of American history. And many people, even after World War II, still saw that as a central event of American history. World War II is now the only thing that has happened in American history. I think a lot of it has to do is that even most white immigrants, they didn't have any ancestors who fought in Civil War. Pretty much most white people in America, or nearly all white people in America, had people here in the 1940s. They have relatives who fought. And it does create a moral purpose for America that we rose up and defeated the most evil ideology we've ever seen on earth. And this means that we're good, and this justifies our world presence and us as a world power as seen through World War II. And so a lot of people extrapolate what the soldiers were doing, even though a lot of soldiers, it was, even in World War II, as in World War I, a great power struggle. It wasn't, even though ideology played a lot more part of it, communism, fascism, and people like to really stoke up the emotions that we're fighting for freedom. It was ultimately a great power struggle between nation states. But that doesn't really justify America as a superpower. We have to have a moral purpose. So they turn it into that these guys were fighting fascism and they saved the world for democracy, even though half of Europe was living under communist domination following World War II. Whatever, that we still go along with this line. So they do see this as, Trump is a threat to that world order created by World War II. People who want less immigration are somehow a threat to that order created by World War II. And all the great enemies are people who, even have criticisms of how globalism was working. And Putin is somehow also a great threat to the order created by World War II, even though in his country they celebrate World War II as the Great Patriotic War. They just built a massive military cathedral where they were blowing up German tanks and reenacting the war before it in a way that they see World War II as a central event of their history, but they treat it in a much different manner than America. They see it as I said, the Great Patriotic War. It's Russia showed off its power as a people to defeat the Germans who wanted to enslave them. And with us, it's more of a matter that it was a triumph of liberal democracy over fascism, rather than the American people triumphing over the Germans and Japanese as people. And we have to use this narrative of World War II to justify our current status as the great spreader of democracy. And so we connect that with it. And I think a lot of people are stupid. They don't really know what Antifa is about. They don't know that this blue-haired guy with a hammer and sickle neck tattoo is somehow just like your grandfather who got wounded at D-Day. They want to continue to believe that. And it's very much the liberals who use that. I mean, the real hardcore leftists will say that those World War II soldiers were racist and sexist and homophobes, which in many cases was true. As pointed out, as somebody had this hilarious tweet about saying, I'm living up to my grandfather's heritage and I'm wearing his boots, and it's somebody in front of a gay pride flag. And then somebody replied yeah, my grandfather was also Antifa, but he disowned me when he found out I was gay. So yeah, they definitely did not have the same standards and beliefs as the current Antifa, and they would have been revolted, and they would support anyone, massive violent force being used against Antifa. But they make a credible moral purpose that appeals to the large majority of Americans by seeing the current Antifa as having the same cause as the World War II troops.
Yeah. And also, for those who don't know, I feel like most people do know this, but Antifa was an organization that existed in the 1930s and 40s back then. So it's not like it's a new thing, or it's not like everybody was just anti-fascist. It was an explicitly
it's created by the Communist Party of Germany. I mean,
yeah. So
it was created.
You have to be communist in order to be Antifa properly.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Stalin ordered the creation of the original Antifa, and all Antifa members are radical leftists who do want destruction of the traditional America that these World War II soldiers fought for. But it doesn't matter. The way the world order that was created by World War II, that not necessarily these troops were fighting for, has to imagine this purpose as us fighting against reactionary elements throughout the globe. And we can see this in the cause again of decriminalizing homosexuality throughout the world is the same cause as what we fought for in World War II, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it does make the Antifa more appealing to the mainstream by claiming that our soldiers were anti-fascist, even though they were just patriots, which Antifa, of course, are not patriots. So any final thoughts on that, Jake?
On that question, I would just kind of echo and elaborate on something that you touched on at the beginning of your answer, and just, America had to moralize its superpower status, which is effectively an empire status, because in order to make it mesh with the American founding, because Britain ruled more landmass than America does, but it had, about the same proportionate influence. And they never did anything like this. A lot of people have issues with the British, but the British never did anything like what we're doing with our power. And that's because they didn't have to moralize about ruling over other peoples. They thought, yeah, we deserve to rule over other peoples because we have, we're better in this way, and we can bring them Christianity, and we can bring them order and civilization and all of that stuff, and plus we get some resources in return.
I did not imagine United Kingdom as an idea, as a people. It was like it was a distinct people from others, while the American national or civic patriotism in a lot of ways now imagines we're just an idea. Everyone can become an American. Ilhan Omar is just as American as you and I. And like the British Empire been like, no, I mean, we'll allow Indians and Pakistanis to fight in our army, but they're still not British.
Right.
They're our colonial subjects. We want them to have a better life, but they're not British.
Right. Whereas we can't say we have colonial subjects, because that doesn't really fit well within the mythos that we've built around the founding. Now, the founding is, yes, it was liberal, and yes, it was, certain things, but it's not quite what we've made it out to be. But in order for that to be cohesive and for us not to have an identity crisis, they have to mesh those two things and say, well, this is about morality. We're trying to carry on that American Revolution in a sense throughout the world. And it's caused a lot of problems.
And I agree. And on that note, I think we've run out of time today, Mr. Jacob C. Lloyd. So we'll have to have you on again. So Jake, share with the audience what you want to plug in. How can people find your work and support you?
Yeah, so if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Jacob C. Lloyd. You can find, generally, if I'm going live or anything, you can find that there. You can watch me at dlive.tv/Jake Lloyd or youtube.com/Jake Lloyd 1776. If you search my name, Jake Lloyd, in either of those, DLive or YouTube, you should be able to find me. You might have to scroll through some of the Star Wars kid on YouTube, but other than that, you should be able to find me.
The Star Wars kid who I think is like in jail right now.
He has like a meth problem or something.
So that happens to the best of us.
Yeah, so you can find me on DLive or YouTube. Follow me at Jacob C. Lloyd on Twitter. I stream on DLive right now. I'm streaming daily, and eventually that will be on both YouTube and DLive again.
Awesome. That's excellent. So everyone give him a follow, and make sure to thank him for his service when you follow him. So Jake, great to have you on. Hope you can return.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on. It's a great time.
You're welcome. And until next time, stay respected.